If you like watches but don't want to spend much, pay attention. You see, I've found a great looking budget Seiko that's under $100 at the time of recording. The only problem is, it won't be around much longer. In this video, we'll delve into the looks, specifications and performance to see whether this is a bargain worth picking up or an outdated relic worth passing on. I say relic because this watch is part of the old school Seiko 5 collection, predating the massive 2019 refresh which saw new Seiko 5 models released with a different logo and minor upgrades. While this means the pre-2019 models are now outdone in terms of fit and finish, they still come with one major upside: price. These days, a new style Seiko 5 will usually set you back well over $200, but some of these last-gen Seiko 5s, well, they're available for often under half that. Despite dozens of these older models still being available online, many of which I've shown before, they are nonetheless a dying breed, as Seiko continues pushing its rebranded, overhauled lineup at retailers, meaning these older Seiko 5s are now only purchasable from grey market dealers like those I've affiliate linked in the video description. If you want to learn the difference between grey market and authorized watch dealers, you can check out this explainer on our website. Fatally, Seiko reportedly discontinued the movement powering these watches many years ago. Essentially, whatever these websites still have left in stock is all that we're gonna get. Cheap Seiko 5s are going bye-bye. Out of those worth pouncing on, I think this one could be at the head of the field. The Seiko SNK 371, as well as its differently codenamed compatriots. I briefly featured this in my top Seikos roundup, but I think it deserves the full review treatment. In fact, this one's actually going to be more of a dual review, also featuring the SNKK 27. As you can see, the latter looks near identical, and that's because it's got the same dial and internals, just with a different case and bracelet. These watches have been known as the speed racers for many years due to the bright, automotive-inspired design, which looks like it would fit right at home on the wrist of a daring driver. Admittedly, it's cool, distinctive designs like this that carry a handful of these older Seiko 5 watches, which in 2024 aren't super impressive on paper. 5 or 6 years ago, the steel construction and mechanical movement made these a value-packed proposition. However, with the rise of Chinese watch brands over the last half-decade offering better movements, improved bracelets or sapphire crystals for a similar cost, most of these entry-level Seikos have started to look more middle of the road from a spec perspective. These Seikos do at least remain a safe purchase, so long as you buy one from a reputable site and not an overseas eBay dealer for instance, you'll get a decent watch that you'll likely have few problems with. The Chinese brands, meanwhile, can be very hit and miss, with some cheaper options straight up lying about materials in their online listings. Out of the two Seikos, my favourite is probably the SNK 371. It's got the same date-just-like steel case as some other Seiko 5s, with a reasonable level of finishing and a contoured profile that hugs the wrist better than many similarly sized alternatives. That said, the SNKK 27 holds its own in this regard too, with similar curvature and overall thickness. Size-wise, the SNK 300 series watches have a diminutive 37.3mm diameter and a 41.7mm lug-to-lug, combined with a reasonable 10.5mm thickness. Meanwhile, those under the SNKK designation are a tad larger, as you can see, at 38.5mm wide and with a lug-to-lug of 45mm, providing greater wrist presence despite the identical thickness. Aesthetically, I prefer the former, whose sporty shape looks slightly more cohesive, though the latter isn't offensive either, with a circular, albeit marginally more dated design. Overall, the level of case finishing is average in today's market. The SNK 300 models also have brushing on the lugs, which is a tad more consistent with the bracelet versus that on the SNKK watches. Due to the larger link size, the SNKK bracelet feels less jangly, though both are still constructed of low-quality folded links, which make each feel quite cheap to the extent that I'd advise at least considering a third-party replacement. Mercifully, they do share the same folding clasp, which accommodates 3 micro-adjustment holes, permitting a good range of fine adjustments if you intend on sticking with the stock options. Still, these bracelets aren't as nice as those fitted to some budget homage brands. Of course, the structural components aren't the main reason these older watches are still worth considering. As is immediately evident, it's the quirky bright dials that constitute the primary pull factor. Whether it's the blue, black or white model, you'll be getting a unique kerosene-fueled design that makes most racing chronographs look tame. with extreme colors and, most prominently, a high-contrast 20-minute track straddling the upper right third. This section of the face could almost pass as a rev counter or speedometer from a high-octane video game or movie. And satisfyingly, Seiko has perfectly matched the second hand with the color of the track on each model, furthering the illusion. These watches also boast a sporty, semi-skeletonized arrow hand, helping them stand out among the sea of Seiko 5s that rely on the ubiquitous Dauphine or baton handsets. In contrast to many dive watches, this implementation is slim and sleek, ensuring it doesn't dominate the remaining watch face. It could be made more legible, though I like how it slips in rather seamlessly. The lume dial markers are much more run-of-the-mill, with a standardized rectangle shape and limited low-light performance, though the inner 5-minute interval text is positioned and sized perfectly to add interest without distraction. Perhaps the only visual element that could do with a revision is the day-date window at 3 o'clock. Of course, this is present to meet one of the original Seiko 5 design criteria set back in the 60s. It's why most Seiko 5 watches still have this window even today. That said, if Seiko had broken canon and removed it, I think we'd have some even better looking watches on our hands, as the wide gap in the dial does disrupt the flow of that chapter ring, especially given its placement within the 20-minute track. Overall, you get a glossy looking appearance that, while not intricate, still has enough depth and dimension to give the watch a semi-premium look. The Hardlex crystal atop also doesn't impact visibility and does offer marginally improved scratch resistance over standard mineral glass. It's worth noting that the racing theme exhibited by these watches is exactly that, theming. Thanks to the bare bones movement within, these aren't chronographs in any way, as you might have guessed from the lack of pushers, so the stylized timing bars are purely for show, as they can't be used to time anything with a great level of precision. The automatic Seiko 7S26 inside is still reasonable for the money, and it can be seen through the exhibition rear. However, these days it's outclassed by more modern Seiko or Miyota alternatives that are often available for the same price. It lacks quality of life features such as hacking and hand winding, but remains reliable and repairable, making it a reasonable entry point for those after their first mechanical watch. It's this movement that was reportedly culled several years ago, starting the extinction countdown for these aging sporty Seikos. The question isn't so much should you buy one while you still can, it's really how much should you pay. Inevitably, prices will balloon as supply starts drying up. While they're sweet watches for around the £100 or $100 mark, their shortcomings would be much harder to overlook at $200 or $300. As a budget watch, they're a great deal of fun though. I'll link all the colors in the video description so you can check pricing for your region. At the price I paid, the SNK 371 gets a style rating of 8.0 and a value score of 7.6, while the SNKK 27 gets a 7.7 for style and a 7.4 for value. For more bargain Seikos, check out this huge roundup video that we did, where we showcased over 20 affordable options worth exploring. Number 5 took me by surprise. Seiko using sapphire?